Imagine, you wake up in your own home, but instead of morning light in the windows, you see a blank stone wall. Just yesterday, there was a passage to the atrium, the voices of servants could be heard, and the smell of fresh bread wafted from the kitchen. Today, only stone, dust, and silence. Behind the wall, Rome lives on, footsteps, conversations, the clatter of dishes. And you already know, you will never be able to leave. This is not a court sentence, it is the decision of one man. In the capital of the empire, where the pater familias had power over his wife, children, and slaves, equal to that of the emperor over his subjects, even the Senate rarely dared to intervene. During the reign of Domitian, when fear and denunciation were as much a part of life as bread and wine, a single suspicion could destroy a home faster than a fire. She was the wife of a senator, respected, beautiful, well-educated. She was born into a family of horsemen, influential enough to arrange marriages that strengthened political alliances. From childhood, she was prepared for the role of mistress of a large house, to manage servants, speak only as much as was necessary, maintain the right acquaintances, and never give cause for gossip. Her marriage to a senator was an event for both families. The atrium was decorated with laurel wreaths, and guests brought amphorae of wine from Campania, and fabrics from the east. On that day, she had no idea that this house would one day become her prison. Her new life seemed perfect. The morning began with sacrifices to the household gods, followed by instructions to the servants, and preparations for receptions. She strolled through the garden, where pomegranates ripened between the columns, and laurel bushes cast shadows on the mosaic paths. The air was filled with the scent of cedar resin, and rose petals, generously scattered on the floor of the atrium. On holidays, she accompanied her husband to temples, where women from the most influential families stood beside her. At banquets, she poured wine for the guests, and listened to conversations about wars, senatorial disputes, and imperial decrees, never interfering, but remembering every word. In an era when Emperor Domitian destroyed even the slightest hint of opposition, a senator's wife could fall out of favor for a single phrase, spoken in the wrong circle. Her husband was a master of covert control. He smiled, but his eyes grew cold when she talked to someone for too long. A glance could lead to weeks of silent tension. Sometimes, people disappeared from her circle of friends, a friend would stop writing, a slave would be sent to another house. No one ever said why, but in Rome, answers were often more dangerous than silence. She did not yet know that one day, this invisible control would become literal walls. The household routine did not change, but the rhythm of her life became different. First, the chariots that took her to the baths disappeared, supposedly broken. Then, invitations from old friends stopped coming. Familiar faces appeared less and less often in the atrium. Her husband explained this as a precaution. He said that the city was in turmoil, that the number of denunciations was growing, and that it was better to wait it out at home. But along with this came new rules: not to leave the house without his permission, to avoid talking to strangers, to report every time she went out. The servants, who had once eagerly brought news from the forum, were now silent. Those who accidentally met her gaze quickly looked away. It seemed to her that they were afraid to say anything unnecessary. Once, she overheard a conversation between two slaves about how Emperor Domitian had ordered the confiscation of the property of a family she was related to, through her mother. They fell silent as soon as they noticed her. It was then that she first felt these changes might not be accidental. As Rome prepared for the Saturnalia, her home grew quieter and quieter. Her husband rarely ate dinner at home, and when he did return, he spoke little and looked past her. Instead of familiar slaves, burly strangers from the northern provinces appeared in the corridors, silent, even among themselves. They stood not only at the gates, but also in the inner passageways, as if guarding, not the house, but someone inside. One night, she woke up to the sound of muffled footsteps. The light of torches flickered through the cracks in the door. 3 men were carrying something long, wrapped in dark cloth. The steward quickly opened the gate, and they disappeared into the darkness. The next day, the servants avoided her. Only an old slave woman, touching an amulet with the knot of Hercules, whispered, "May the gods avert disaster," and immediately turned away. A few days later, a rumor spread through the city: the wife of another senator had been found dead in her own bedroom. Officially, it was an accident. But the servants whispered that her bedroom door had been locked from the outside. She did not believe in coincidences. In Rome, the truth could always be replaced with something more convenient to call the truth. It began at dawn. She was awakened by the dull sound of hammers and the scraping of iron against stone. At first, the sounds were distant, but they quickly grew closer. She approached the door and heard a key turning in the lock, not to open it, but to lock it. A sharp smell of lime wafted through the cracks. In Rome, this smell meant only one thing: someone was laying bricks. Walling up was a rare, but well-known method of punishment for those whom the pater familias wanted to erase from his life, without trial or witnesses. And no magistrate interfered in domestic affairs. Her body tensed. She wanted to believe that it was just repairs, or temporary isolation, but behind the muffled commands and the rhythm of the hammers, she sensed a cold certainty: they had no intention of letting her out. The windows were covered from the inside with thick shields. The light began to fade, as if someone were erasing the day from her room. Only a narrow strip remained, creeping across the mosaic floor and melting away with her last doubts. The hammers struck steadily. The stone fell layer by layer, like a seal of doom. Behind the wall, she could still hear signs of life: the footsteps of slaves, the clatter of dishes, distant laughter in the street. In Rome, they said, these sounds were the most cruel form of torture. They reminded you that the world still existed, but you were no longer part of it. She would never know what had caused it: jealousy, suspicion of conspiracy, or rumors about her connections with a family that had fallen out of favor with the emperor. She only felt how with each blow of the hammer, the space around her contracted, turning into a stone coffin. Her name has not been preserved. The records of that time contain only a brief mention: the senator's wife was deprived of access to her home. No reasons, no verdict, no right to defense. In the time of Domitian, when even senators disappeared without a trace, such lines in the chronicles were a verdict in themselves. Historians of later eras speculated that it may have been a case of jealousy, political betrayal, or ties to a disgraced family. But in a world where the law was subject to the will of one man, the truth often died with those it concerned. We can only imagine what she felt in her final hours, hearing footsteps and voices behind the wall, remembering the smell of the garden she would never see again, and realizing that even her name would disappear. Perhaps that was the greatest cruelty of all: not death in a stone dungeon, but complete erasure from the memory of the world. In Rome, a person could be killed twice: by the body and by oblivion.